our shir on Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers. We have been going, for those who have just joined for the first time, we've been going for a number of weeks, already up to Mishna Dallad, the fourth Mishnah, even though we've actually studied 5 because we did the introductory one as well in our first session. And our shir lasts from 1 to 1:30, strictly this half hour, in order to be able to get a quick injection of some very valuable tools for life. And that's what this is really all about. Some tools for life, some ideas that we can share in actually how to better ourselves, how to better the environment around us, how to better the atmosphere around us, and how to be better people and better Jews. So we're up to Mishna Dallad. So in most Siddurim, and in this Siddur that I'm using on page 271 in the Chabad Siddur, we here are meeting up for the first time with 2 individuals. So up until now, if we take it that we had Moshe, and then we went we mentioned Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, but we spoke about Shimon HaTzadik, we spoke about Antigonus Ish Socho, as we mentioned last week. Here we meet up with 2 individuals, Yosi ben Yoezer and Yosi ben Yochanan. Now it's important to pause here for a moment and to understand that this was the stage where the leadership of the Jewish people, and particularly from a spiritual point of view, was handed over to what they call the Zugot. Zugot meaning pairs. For the first time, we meet up with this concept of a pair of leaders, 2 leaders, 2 people, probably and obviously with different roles, but here we had 2 people. We had Moshe, who was one leader, we had Joshua, who was one leader, and then we meet up with Shimon HaTzadik and so on, one leader. Here we have the Zugot, a Zug being a pair. We here have the pairs of leaders. And from now on, for a while, we're going to be dealing with pairs of ideas and pairs of leaders. Some of our great sages have pointed out that every time we mention one of these pairs, we're actually talking about pairs where the one is what we call the Nasi, and we'll talk about these roles in a moment. The Nasi, which we know to be like the prince or the president, and the other one we talk about as the head of the Beit Din. Now remember that always with these pairs, they were the members of the Sanhedrin, so they sat in the judgment chambers, and very often they were the ones who not only found and were seated in judgment in cases, but actually it was like a constitutional court, lahavdil, where they were actually canonizing, they were making the law, they were deciding great legal matters rather than deciding matters in cases. Here we have these 2 that we meet up first, Yosi ben Yoezer and Yosi ben Yochanan. These 2 were the first pair. So it stands to reason, we're told, that the first one, the one who's mentioned first, excuse me, is the Nasi. That one was the Nasi. The second one was the head of the Beit Din. You know, later on, we're going to come and we're going to meet up with Hillel and Shammai. Hillel was the Nasi. Shammai was the Av Beit Din. He was the head of the Beit Din, kind of the, let's call it, the spiritual head of the Jewish people, or the kingship kind of a head of the Jewish people. And then you had the head of the legal system, lahavdil, but sort of the judge president. You had these separate roles, and we always mention the Nasi first. The Nasi is mentioned first. So Yosi ben Yoezer, we told here in Mishna Dallad, Yosi ben Yoezer, Ish Tzereida. So Yosi ben Yoezer was a man from a place called Tzereida. Yosi ben Yochanan Ish Yerushalayim, and Yosi ben Yochanan was a man of Jerusalem. Kiblu mehem, they received the traditions, the oral Torah and everything that went with it, they got it from them. Who's the them in the story? Who did they receive it from? Well, we have to say that they received it from the previous generation. But in the previous generation, we see that the leader was Antigonus. That's the person mentioned in the previous Mishnah. But we know that his teacher was Shimon. So we have to say that they received it from Shimon and Antigonus, who they kind of viewed as one. Or some say that in fact Kiblu Mehem was that they received it from the men of the Great Assembly, of which we have mentioned before that Shimon HaTzadik was the last one. So if we go down now in the lineage, we're talking about, or the heritage, we're talking about the fact that Yosi ben Yoezer and Yosi ben Yochanan, these two great leaders, both of them are described with the word Ish. Now you and I know that the word Ish means a man. But in Torah speak, the word Ish doesn't just mean a man. These weren't any men. These were men of great stature. These were the leaders. So Yosi ben Yoezer was Ish Tzreda. He was the man of Tzreda. And Yosi ben Yochanan, Ish Yerushalayim, he was the man of Jerusalem. To be called the man of the city was a sign of their great prowess, of their great learning, of their great leadership. These were the two great leaders who were the first zug, the first pair of leaders in Jewish teaching, in Jewish thinking, in Jewish history, and they led as a pair. We've got to say that at the same time as it seems to be a dilution of the power base, so to speak, it wasn't all vested in one individual. There is something to be said for the fact that these individuals obviously were able to work together. They were people who didn't necessarily have such big egos in any way, not to say that the previous guys did, but they were able to work together. It's an accolade for each of them that they were able to share power, that they were able to be involved in the leadership roles without treading on each other's toes. Yes, obviously, very many times saw things differently, but that didn't damage their ability to lead and to come to an agreement of uniformity in all of the things that they found and that they did. And this therefore goes down as one of the accolades of these individuals, of Yosi ben Yoezer and Yosi ben Yochanan, the man of Tzreda and the man of Jerusalem, the Nasi of the time, the leader of the time, the spiritual head, the figurehead and spiritual guide of the Jewish people at the time, and his, in inverted commas, counterpart or right-hand man, who was the head of the Beit Din, who was the head of the Sanhedrin, the legal head of the Jewish people. Now we first quote in this Mishnah, Yosi ben Yoezer. So the first one we're going to focus on is the Nasi, the first one, Yosi ben Yoezer. So it says, Yosi ben Yoezer ish Tzreda omer. Yosi ben Yoezer, the man of Tzreda, said. And here he tells us some interesting tools for life, some guides for ourselves. He says, Yehi veisecha beizvad lachachamim. Make your house a house of counsel of the wise. Make your house a house of counsel for the wise people. Make sure that wise people are found in your environment, that they are in your house, that you invite them in and you entertain what they have to say and you listen to what they have to say. Make your house a place of vad lachachamim. And he goes on and he says, and you should sit, or you should position yourself in the afar ragleim, literally in the dust of their feet. You should sit in the dust of their feet. And you should drink with thirst their words. So the first one that we quote here, the Nasi, is Yosi ben Yoezer. Yosi ben Yoezer, aside for the fact that he was the Nasi, that he was the prince, he held this position within the Jewish people and from a spiritual leadership point of view, he also happened to be the high priest. And he was known, the Gemara, the Talmud tells us, that he was the most, the highest, the most spiritual of all the high priests. So he had a spiritual qualification. And the Talmud elsewhere tells us that he had the most thorough knowledge of all of Torah. There wasn't a thing that Yosi Benjamin didn't know in Torah. He was a completely spiritual and a completely and absolutely learned individual who knew all of Torah, who knew all of the spiritual things that needed to be known, and he was a Kohen. Now, one of the things, and I can speak here from personal pride, I suppose, is that Kohanim are supposed to have a love for the Jewish people. You know, when a Kohen goes up to Duchen, when he goes up to the platform to say the brachas, to give the brachot to everybody who's in shul, whether it's on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, or Sukkot, or Shmini Atzeres, or Simchas Torah, or whenever it is that he goes up to do the duchening, or in Israel every day at davening, the Kohen has to bless the people with a bracha. And the bracha that he makes is that he blesses the Jewish people. Mevarech Samu Yisrael ba'ava. He's got to bless the Jewish people with love. A Kohen has to bless them with love. So much so that we're told that if a Kohen is involved perhaps in a court case with somebody in the community, he shouldn't go up to Duchen. Because if you're involved and you're fighting against somebody in a court battle, your love can't be sincere. Well, there's another alternative, and that's to make sure that your Kohanim don't get into court cases, or they don't get involved in atmospheres whereby they hate anybody, or they dislike anybody, or they look askance at anybody. But the whole point of the Kohen was he had to judge everything with love. Now, one of the things that Yosi Benjamin was well known for, according to the Talmud, was he was known for the fact that in certain matters of purity and impurity, he had been, let's call it, lenient. Now, it's not something that we can possibly fully understand, I suppose, this idea of being lenient. But what it meant was, because we could say if you're too lenient, or you might be finding the wrong way, you might be doing the wrong thing. But he was known to be lenient, particularly in three matters where everybody else, or the whole opinion, actually seemed to be against him. He found leniency. Now, what was this leniency? You know, when we think about a person who perhaps had tzoras, where a person had some kind of a blemish, we call it leprosy, that came about through them speaking ill, through them misbehaving, through them not doing what they should be doing. The person that they went to show this physical ailment, which was a blemish on their skin, they didn't go to the doctor. They didn't go for a medical examination. They weren't going to the leader of the Beit Din, excuse me, but they had to go to the Kohen. Kohanim were tasked with looking at these things. What was the idea? Because people knew that the Kohanim loved them. They knew that they weren't going to be judged. They knew that people weren't going to wag their fingers and say to them, oh, you misbehaved, and that's why this happened. You know why you got the tzaras? You spoke Lashon Hara, and we're going to send you out of the camp. No. They knew that Kohanim were bent on keeping the Jewish people together. They knew that Kohanim were bent on trying to make as many people have access to the Beit HaMikdash as possible. And this here is what Yosi Benjamin is well known for. He was known as being, they called him actually the lenient one. He was known to be lenient. His leniency was in trying to encourage Jews to be and do the right thing, but at the same time, not being judgmental. This was not a harsh, punishing judge. This wasn't somebody who wanted to find difficulty. He bent over backwards to bring Jews in. He bent over backwards to make Torah accessible to them. He bent over backwards to make sure that these Yidden, these Jews, could have access to the Beis HaMikdash. And so he actually, they say, is almost warning something here. He's telling us something about the discussion amongst the wise. The discussion amongst the wise, while sometimes you could say, well, this one sees black and this one sees white, or this one says yay and this one says nay in a discussion. And you might think that, you know what, these guys are at loggerheads with each other. And therefore, that must lead to some kind of emotional anger at each other. Why can't you see the way that I see it? And arguments that would develop. But all their arguments, in fact, were always l'shem shamayim. And when an argument is l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, the peacefulness that it promotes and the peace that it brings into the atmosphere is one that one has to learn from. And so he's telling us, perhaps based on his great experience, his wealth of knowledge, you know what you've got to do first and foremost is we have to learn from the ways of the wise. Learning from the ways of the wise is not, well, to learn only their brain power, but to learn the way that they can work out their arguments without it leaving any stain, without it leaving any mark on them, without them being at loggerheads with each other. They never played the man. They played the question, the answer, the way of seeing it. And you want to know something? What Yosi Benjamin perhaps stands for is when a leniency is found in a halachic debate, in a halachic way, this isn't a weakness, rather it's a strength. The person, actually, when you bring a question to a Rav, to a Beit Din and so on, excuse me, and they're always strict. Oh, it's very, very strict. You can only do it this way. It's that my way or the highway. Actually, that doesn't show really the greatness of the Beit Din or of the Rav, because it's easy to say no. It's easy to say it's treif. It's easy to say you're wrong. It's easy to tell you, you know what, you've messed up your kitchen, go burn down the house and buy yourself a new kitchen and start from scratch. It's easy to say, but it's not that practical. And what you're going to end up with is that people won't be keeping the law because you're making it too difficult for them. You're making it too strict. To have the ability and the learning and the know-how and the understanding of people to be able to say, in this kind of an environment, in this kind of a case, in this situation, you can do this, you should do that, and so on. And this is the easy way of sorting it out. It needs wisdom and it needs chokhmah. And Yosi Benjamin says here, remember to make your house a place of va'ad for chachomim. Make it a place where wise people give counsel. So we learn something else here. It's not only that you yourself should place yourself in the environment, but he talks about make that your home. There are two ways of reading this, by the way. Way number one of reading this is that you should make your home in the place where the people are learning Torah. In other words, have a set place that you go to study. Go to the Beit Medrash, go to your shul, go to your community center, go to your Chabad house or whatever, and that's where you should study Torah, and hopefully surrounded by other greater minds than us that are sitting there and studying. That rubs off on us. Our sages use the example of a person who walks into a perfume factory. When you walk into a perfume factory, you might not put on any of the perfume. You might not be able to afford it because it's imported and it's expensive. But when you walk out of there, you smell great. You pick up from the atmosphere. You pick up some of the flavors and the fragrances that these wise people are giving off. And so when you place yourself in an environment of Torah learning, when you place yourself in the environment of wise people, it rubs off on you. It enables you to have that kind of an atmosphere. And that's not that you're going to walk out of there and all of a sudden you smell like roses and all of a sudden you are the main man or the main woman walking out in the street. No, this is the idea of the atmosphere, the environment is going to be good for you. So always a Jew needs to know that he should have a place that he goes to learn Torah. And we should not, it's hard to say, and especially in times like this, but very often people like to do what they call stiebel hopping. You run here and you run there and you run to the next place and so on. From a Torah perspective, one should be a little bit more settled. And perhaps Yosi Benjamin is telling us that as well. Have Beisacha, make your home that place. Go to a certain place where you know that there are wise people, and make that your place, make that your home. We could learn this in the other way, though, and that is that you must make your own house a Beis Vad LaChachamim. In other words, invite and have wise and good and kind and generous and Torah observant, mitzvah doing people come to your house. Because even if you're not living up to that standard, when they come to your house, that has an influence on your home. It has an influence on your children and your grandchildren and the people that come to your house and your whatever. Bring wise, clever, good people into your home. And even if you may feel that you're not quite up to their standard, it is going to have an impact and an influence not only on you, but on your home. Your home will be a different place. Now your home will be, to use the same analogy, smelling of the perfume of their great Torah learning and their abilities and their actions and so on. And then he says, and your position should not be a position of pride. You should be sitting in the dust of their feet. That's where you actually should position yourself. Now here once again, we're borrowing a couple of images, but the idea of sitting in the dust of their feet may not be literally that, when they sit on a chair, you must sit on the floor, although there is the insinuation of not being arrogant and of not being full of yourself and not thinking, you know what, I can rub shoulders with these people who are wiser and greater and more learned than me and whatever. You should rather be more of a servant to them. See yourself as being able to bring them food and being able to give them a drink and being able to pour something with them, holding the chair for them to sit down, etc. Be a little bit servile in a way towards them, because it's not them only that you are respecting, but the Torah and the knowledge and the Chachma, the wisdom that they have. But here he uses the image of sitting in the dust of their feet. Now, the sages point out that when we think about the word afar is not really just dust, but it's rather got the idea of being it's a higher quality. It's something that can still produce. It's like when you would walk outside and you would get sand on your foot, on your shoe. That's afar. When we talk about avak is like dust that could easily be blown away. It's a finer type of a granule, but the where he talks here about the afar, it actually is telling us that you've got to know that even the dust on the feet of the Talmidei Chachamim, of these great people, can teach you something. You can learn something from that. And here we have a great limud, and something very important for us to remember, that, and I suppose it cuts both ways. The wise person and the Talmid Chacham and the leader of the generation has to know that people won't only be listening to what he says, but they'll also be listening to what he does. And they'll be watching the way, literally, you're talking about the ragleihem, their feet, be watching the way that he walks. The way that a wise person walks is something that you can learn from as well. You know, the Talmud goes out of its way to tell us that there are certain things that you can learn from people, even by the way they close a door. It's a beautiful thing to think about. You can learn the character of a person by the way they shut a door. Think about it. Is the door just flung shut? Do you just smash it closed? Do you turn it behind you, don't care whether it closes or it doesn't close? Or is it done with a refinement, with an edelkeit? You can see the character of a person by the way they close the door. By the same token, you can see the character of a person, I think, by the way they eat. By, you would hardly have great respect for a big Talmud Chacham if he dives into the food and grabs something and but munches on a chicken leg while he's talking to you, and so on. Table manners and behavior and the way people eat is something that it also shows the fineness of the character. So what are they saying here? Is the dust on their shoes. The dust on their shoes could teach you something. You could learn something from the afar, from the dust on their shoes. That in itself, and that of itself, will also be productive for you in your passage through life as well. So see yourself as being less than them, but remember that you can learn from every single thing that they have. You don't always have to understand. You know, we always used to marvel as Bachrim going to hearing the Rebbe's Farbrengens. The Lubavitcher Rebbe used to speak on a Shabbos afternoon, sometimes for several hours, and sometimes we stood there for 4 hours, and you would come away and you really didn't understand that much at all. Remember, this Rebbe was speaking in Yiddish, and it was a Torah Yiddish. And there was no microphone, obviously, because it was a Shabbos afternoon. And very often you came away feeling, you know what, I stood there for 3, 4, 5 hours sometimes. And I come away and what did I really learn? But the fact is, you did learn. You learned from observing the Rebbe's behavior, seeing the way the Rebbe made Kiddush, seeing the way the Rebbe held the cup, seeing the way the Rebbe drank, seeing the way the Rebbe greeted people, seeing the way the Rebbe said l'chaim with people, whatever it was. There was so much that one could learn that you came away with a wealth of knowledge and you didn't even realize it. And this perhaps is what we're referring to here as well. Afar ragleihem, the afar, the dust of their feet. And he says, and you should drink thirstily their words. With thirst, drink their words. Now, Torah has many references to this concept of being thirsty. And in fact, if we take a look at it very carefully and we think about this instruction from Yosi Benjamin, we should thirstily drink their words. The fact of the matter is that if you get more and more into Torah, it's kind of a, what would we call it? It's a sort of a spiritual palindrome, if you wish. It goes backwards and forwards because the more you taste Torah, or the more you imbibe Torah, the more you drink Torah, the less it seems to quench your thirst, because learning of Torah makes you more thirsty for Torah. And the more you learn, the more you understand the value of it, and the more you want to learn. It's when you're learning very little that you don't. This is an instruction, perhaps, from Yosi Benjamin to really get into it, to start learning. Drink up the wealth of knowledge that the wise can impart to you. Drink it, and drink it with a thirst. Don't just sip at it and say, you know what, it's negligible. I don't really need it. You know, like I'll take a sip off the top, but I don't really need it. No, we understand with a thirst that we need this, that this is something without which we cannot live, that Torah is something that is going to give us an ability not only to survive today, but it's going to give us an ability to carry on tomorrow and into the future. And we've got to be able to take these words of Torah and imbibe them, drink them in a way whereby we go there with a thirst that needs quenching. So we take it in a deep fashion, and we understand how essential it is to us to be able to carry on and to live. And at the same time, understanding that by learning it, it's going to make us a little more thirsty for more Torah. So we're going to do this not only today, but we're going to need to do it tomorrow as well. The Torah learning, the sitting at the feet of the Chachamim, the bringing the Chachamim, the wise people into your home. To end off with, there is something very, very important, I think, that we've touched on in this Mishnah, which is the idea of creating that environment, that atmosphere. There needs to be an atmosphere of Torah learning wherever you go. There needs to be, whether you're going to the base medrash or whether you bring it to your house, then that atmosphere is something that we need. It's something that we've been so sorely missing in a large part over this last year, where, yes, we can sit in front of this here computer screen or telephone and look at it and do it, whatever. It gives us something, but there is something about the atmosphere. There's something about the atmosphere that's created in a shul, in a base medrash, in a yeshiva. There's an atmosphere that kind of, it surrounds you in every which possible way. And I think that what Yosi Benjamin is is looking at here is the idea of building that atmosphere. It's about what you see. It's about drinking the words. It's about sitting at their feet. It's about the dust. It's about the house being imbued with this great and this wondrous and this fantastic atmosphere. This is what he wants us to do, and this is his instruction and his great tool that I wanted to share with you today. Make sure that you seek out the wise, that you learn and that you ingest what they say, and that you drink with thirst the words of the wise, that there is Torah that surrounds you wherever you are and wherever you go. It influences everything in your life. It influences the way you behave. It influences the way that you talk. And hopefully we can learn not only that from our chachamim, but even down to the feet, to the legs, that we see the way that they walk and the steps that they take, and the way that they put down their feet and the way that they lift them up. These things are also of importance to our derech, to our way forward in our lives. So I hope you have learned something today. We'll be back, please God, next week, same time and same place at 1 o'clock on Monday for another episode of Tools for Life. We'll move on to a very interesting Yosi Benjamin saying, which is going to have a lot to teach us. It's a big Mishnah next week, so come prepared to listen. Look forward to seeing you then, and have a great week. Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Keep well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Keep well.
Is there any way that we can get the previous recordings from?
Yes, I'll get Sharon onto it. I'll get her to be in touch with you. Is that Felicity asking?
Yeah,
Who's asking?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yes. Great.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Rabbi.
Take
Thanks.
care. Keep well.
Bye.